I'd like to invite you to the first presentation of NMW. It's dedicated to the theme of driving profitability and growth with an enterprise system. Presenting today is Kevin Hooper, who is a long-standing industry figure and someone with much experience in installing ERP, especially into enterprise manufacturing situations.
Thank you and good morning. This is actually an interesting place to make a presentation, so we'll start. So I'm talking about driving profitability and growth with an ERP system. The first thing I'd like to touch on is that Australian industry is in deep trouble, but it's interesting to see all of the exhibitions here today. We are faced with a high Australian dollar. We have high employment costs relative to Japanese, German, US companies, and particularly China, Taiwan. We have a small local market. We have low levels of innovation generally, although we like to think of ourselves as innovative. So is the future terminal? Well, sure as hell we need to do it differently. So what do? So we start to go back and have a look at some of the old mathematical formulas of the past. It's not too onerous, but this formula is broken down into two parts. The V is vision, P is plan, A is action, and RC is resistance to change from employees. So when you're introducing a new system, whether it be a mechanical system in the factory or an ERP system, a software package in the office and the factory, there'll be a resistance to change. So you've got to clearly understand the vision, you've got to have a strong plan, you've got to have a strong action plan, and if you don't have any vision, say your vision's 0 out of 10, but you have a fantastic application plan, but if you multiply 0 by 10, it's still 0, so you won't overcome the employee resistance. So it's broken up into two parts. This part here is fundamentally the strategic business planning exercise in your company, and the second one is really around the employee mindset. However, both of these major issues are influenced by leadership and management, and I just want to quickly touch on some definitions. So managers, hopefully I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know, but a lot of people in Australia in management, including this little black duck, tend to forget this at times. So managers are there for planning, controlling, coordinating and checking, textbook stuff. They're also there to provide tools and ensure people produce what they are supposed to produce. So without the proper tools and without, in the context of this morning's discussion, without the proper ability to analyse and collect data, then your company's going to, or your employees in your company are going to be behind the 8 ball. So leadership is the ability to handle a group in an organisation, make it prosper and expand. So expand is meaning develop the capability of the organisation and develop the capability of the individuals. That's what fundamentally expanding means. So good leadership, amongst other things, a good leader will give positive orders leading to known accomplishments. This is where intellectual capability comes in. They've got to be great at administration, and this is where data comes in. Because if you don't have good administration in purchasing, in accounting, in scheduling, in marketing, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball. You've got to be able to create excitement, you've got to take risks, and above all, leadership have got to care, or leaders have to care. Now, for growth and innovation in industry, and particularly manufacturing, we need appropriate vision of what to achieve. We need intelligent employees to analyse data. We need plans to achieve, the P. We need actions carefully monitored and adjusted as required, the A. We need employees with a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities, part of the CR element of implementing change, appropriate technology, and employees feeling good about themselves and their organisation. I don't want to underplay that, because if you've got employees that are somewhat pissed off with their environment and their management and their leadership, they won't particularly embrace change. But, there's a but. Are the conclusions based on senior data? Now, senior data is fundamentally important data. Now, we all know people who will gather data, gather information, and they'll continue to gather it, they'll continue to churn it through, but unless it's really the data directly associated with what you're trying to implement, then it's not senior data, it's just fluff. So you've got to focus on the senior data, and is the data accurate and is it easily accessible? So is a reliable ERP system necessary? Yes. But if it actually works and is easily used. Now, we've all had experience with ERP systems, including myself, that have been put in at great expense, take 2 years or 3 years to implement. Nobody wants to use them in the end, and they become a millstone around productivity improvement. So what are the challenges of implementing an ERP system? And this is basically what I'm talking about this morning. So I've been involved with 4 ERP implementations. 2 were terrible, 1 was not bad, and 1 was highly successful. And the one that was highly successful, I want to talk about that, how it was planned and how it was implemented this morning. Now, the interesting one is that these 2 here, I'm not going to mention companies, but these 2 terrible ones were implemented in 2 multinational companies. I was directly responsible for one, and we spent in one of them, which is an automotive company that comes out of America, we spent about 15 years ago in excess of $2.5 million, and after trying to get it to work for 6 years, we ended up scrapping it. So there was a lesson in that, and I actually learnt that lesson as we went forward. The one that was not bad was again a multinational company in the automotive sector, and the advantage we had there, it was a big system implemented by 41 dedicated IT specialists in the company, so it wasn't done on a shoestring or in a small company. It was done relatively well. And the one that was highly successful in a $50 million manufacturing company in Australia that is in Dandenong, Victoria. I left there about 2 years ago when the ownership changed, and the company has continued to grow and expand and supplying to all of the major auto companies selling products in Australia, including the manufacturers. So what does success look like when you're implementing an ERP system? So the very, very first thing that must be understood is to understand what you need. So you need the vision or the scope, and this is where the V multiplied by the P multiplied by the A has got to be greater than the resistance to change. If you don't, as a leader or as a manager, understand what you really want out of an ERP system, well then don't implement it. Don't implement it until you really understand what you want. And I'll give you an idea of what we gave out at the company I work for, which is Frontline Australasia in Dandenong. So we said, we made a list of what we wanted, and this is not rocket science. This is pretty superficial in one sense, but really important. A couple of items are really important. So it must fully integrate all the company data. It must be single entry. It must have a global presence. I'll come back to a couple of these. The supplier must have a track record in support and service. We said we don't want to make any code changes, so we just wanted to buy a system off the shelf, install it, train people, personalise it, personalise the screens for the individuals who have got some resistance to change. That's one way of overcoming their reluctance, is to personalise their screens. But we didn't want to customise it and by having to rewrite code or having the installing company rewrite code. It must be easy to learn and particularly easy to use. Going back to that point I said before, ERP systems are fantastic and are necessary in a company, but if they're not accurate and they're not easy to use, then users will walk away and will not touch them. And we wanted one that could be personalised, the screens, but in the context of no code changes, we didn't want it to be customised. So single entry, we had a system that was not fully integrated. Data had to be manually transferred from one segment of our process to another. Errors were being made, time was being wasted. So how did we find out what systems fitted our basic criteria? And we hired 3 University of Melbourne students to evaluate the market. They evaluated in total 21 systems. Now there's probably hundreds, but due to our list of criteria, they were able to whittle it down to 21. And they spoke to each of those 21 companies and presented 5 systems for our consideration. And they provided a report, not 200 pages, but each of the 5 suppliers had really 2 or 3 pages of summary of strengths and weaknesses and whether they can or can't fit our criteria. So as a management team, we had all 5 companies present. In amongst those 5 were 2 major suppliers with small to medium enterprise derivatives. 3 others we had not even heard of. So we were not the experts in ERP systems, didn't pretend to be. These young university students, good learning exercise, and they went out and did the homework for us. We found after reviewing that one was designed for the small to medium industrial applications at that time, and we had all 5 companies present to us, but this particular one they presented 3 times to a cross-section of our staff. So we wanted to be sure that all the majority of users had an opportunity to listen to what these people were saying and assess whether they felt that it was sales talk or something really concrete. So we had a number of people, and it happened to be 30-odd people who listened through their presentations. We also visited 2 of their sites. So again, with ERP, it's easy to get carried away with the moment and say, look, I'm going to rush out and buy a enterprise resource planning system and spend a lot of money or spend some money and then say, oh, it doesn't work. You've got to really make sure that what you're getting is really going to satisfy your needs. So there was a number of companies in Australia, and one that particularly sparked our interest was a major derivative of the Toyota Motor Company. We did business with them because they actually supplied product to us. We knew the general manager very well. I personally rang the general manager and said, look, can you tell us about this particular system, which is happened to be Syspro? He gave me a glowing report, and I said, look, with due respect, I'm not an expert. I'd like our technical people to come down and talk to your technical people. And he agreed, surprisingly. So our purchasing manager went down with some people, our finance manager went down with some people, our engineering manager went down with some people, our production manager went down with some people, and they came back with an endorsement of the product. The other interesting one, the sales manager from this company said, we've also, because this company is a global company, so it fitted our criteria, we've got some applications up and running in UK, and there's a number of companies that are in the manufacturing space. Why don't you consider, if you don't believe us, giving them a call? Well, as it turned out, we had 2 people going to the UK on business, which was the engineering and the operations manager, and they went to this company, one particular company, which is very similar to what we were on about, and I got a telephone call at 12 o'clock at night, Eastern Standard Time, Australia, and these 2 guys were mature individuals, sceptical about anything that looks like a computer software system, and were very excited. So we ended up choosing a system from South Africa called Syspro. So we had a vision. We took a lot of time, and I say a lot of time, from getting the students involved to making the final decision was around about 6 months. So we took time to understand really what we're getting ourselves into, and would the provider provide what we needed. So our vision part of it, we thought we did pretty well. So then we wanted to get into the P part, the planning and the implementation. And at the advice of the provider, we set up a steering committee to plan and monitor progress, and we hired a consultant, and I don't know whether she's around Melbourne today, but we hired a consultant called Jenny Parkin to chair the committee, and the committee was made up of the company coordinator. I was involved. There was a number of internal users, shop floor people and also managers. So we had a cross-section of people that were going to use the system. Syspro were involved, obviously, and our IT provider. So we're a small company that used an outside company called Premium Networks to actually maintain our servers and maintain the operating integrity of all of our computer systems. And we ran, and they still do run a lot of systems with computers. So this group met at least weekly, and we put out formal minutes. Now, we had a meeting, say, on a Wednesday. On the Thursday morning, the minutes were out. So this was not window dressing. This was serious stuff, because we were spending a significant amount of money. We were planning to shut down a system that was driving everybody to distraction, and so we needed to do it well. While the planning was going on and all the technical issues were being addressed, we were training our employees, and Syspro were coming in. We had a room set up with a number of computers dedicated to the training, and I think on probably average 2 days a week for a number of, well, as it turned out, it was a couple of months. 2 days a week, people would cycle in training room, and Syspro had people there training and retraining and retraining, and we were responding to the users' concerns, and we were addressing this resistance to change. Now, as it turned out, they very quickly saw that this system was easy to use and very simple to manipulate. They could customise their own screens if they wanted to put a red highlights or whatever on the screen to satisfy their own particular needs. And over a period of time, they could see the benefit, and they were starting to get the users were starting to get a large amount of excitement about implementing the product. But like every good program, there's issues, and we found our data was not senior in the sense that it was basically inaccurate. So we were running test runs offline, and we were putting data in and getting product costs out, and quite frankly, it meant nothing to us. So we immediately stopped through the committee, and this is where Jenny Parkin came in. She was strong and said, stop all the rubbish, let's fix the data, and we assigned 3 engineers to correct our base data, and they were things like our bills of materials were incorrect, our costings in the system, believe it or not, were incorrect, our standard times and a whole range of other data was incorrect, and this took 6 weeks of serious work. So when we talk about senior data, it must be accurate. So if you want to get a system that actually achieves what the company's strategic outcome is, well then the data that you're using obviously has to be accurate. So what did we achieve? Syspro went live into the 8th month of when we made the decision to start looking, and 2 weeks after we stopped the old system, shut it down. So it was a very seamless implementation, and in our company all 32 users took to it like water to a duck, or duck to water I should say, or shit to blanket, whatever you want to call it. So we had overcome, as it turned out, actually before we pushed the go button, we'd overcome any resistance to change within the organisation. And the outputs immediately made sense. We were able to accurately cost our products for the first time, and we drew up a chart, a Pareto chart of profitability by individual products. We found a whole bunch that were unprofitable. We went back and negotiated with some of our customers. They generally told us to take our problem as our problem, but in some cases we got some price adjustments. In other cases we actually stopped producing those particular products. But the important thing is, for the first time in our miserable lives as a manufacturing company, we could accurately cost our products. The other important thing, that the employees understood the link between upstream and downstream data. So when they're going through the process of implementing and training with this system, they could, on trial data, they could see how the accuracy of data, bills of materials, receiving dockets, delivery dockets, invoices, etc., the accuracy of those and how they affect the downstream output of the company. Now, bear in mind, the only reason that any company puts in an ERP system is to make money and to make their company more efficient. It's no more complex than that. So they could see the link from what they were doing out in the plant on receiving dockets and what was happening to the integrity of data that spat out the end, where management were making fundamental decisions on behalf of the organisation. Now, when we implemented, of course, not everybody had access to all the data. They were restricted. If you're out in the plant, we didn't want people looking at the bottom line profitability of each product, although we shared profitability with all of our employees. Inventory accuracy was now trustworthy. So since the program's been implemented, we've done 5 inventory stock takes, and they've all been within plus or minus 2% of what was on the system, which there's a bit more to it than that, but fundamentally it's good. The system is good for inventory control. Monthly financial reports. Previously, where we prided ourselves if we got a financial report out by the 21st of the following month, we thought we were doing pretty well. But with this system, we were completed the morning after the end of the month. And we could and can, and they still do, get daily outputs from the system, so you can use it on a daily basis if you want to. We didn't go down that track initially. So financial monthly reports, and fundamentally the CFO, all they had to do is push a couple of buttons at the end of the month and out pop the full monthly report, including key performance indicators, graphs, whatever was required. And then I suppose I shouldn't boast about this in some ways, but we were able to reduce our staff overheads by greater than 20%. Now, I know that for a fact because we laid 20% of our indirect staff people off as a result of the implementation of the system. We were wasting so much time with inaccurate data, with going back. There was only one guy in the company that had any interest in the old system. He was being bombarded consistently by people like myself and others saying, can you tell me what this means in the system, in the old system? Believe it or not, we had 130 employees at that time. About 40 of them were indirect staff, and we were able to surgically reduce that number by 20%. And as I said, that's a real number. Morally not a good thing to brag about, but from an operational and profitability, it definitely bore fruit. So the whole selection, implementation and usage, particularly the usage of the system, was just wonderful. It's the only way I can describe having been through a couple of really difficult situations previously. So where does success end and start? So this is, as you can tell, this is the end of my presentation. It starts with this very fundamental decision, and I was introduced to that formula by General Motors many decades ago, so long ago that I wouldn't like to describe. But that is a very fundamental formula of change: vision by plan, by action, must be greater than the resistance of change by employees. Success starts with data which is accurate and easily accessible. So as managers, as accountants, as engineers, if you're making judgments and making a call on data that's inaccurate, as we were previously, you can imagine what happens, and sure enough, it was happening to us. So a little bit of drama. Success revolves around bloody good strategic planning, which is based on accurate and accessible data. And finally, we should not ever overlook success is formulated and delivered by very competent leadership and executive performance. Thank you very much.